Hi there and welcome to another episode of Dot Connecting with David Icke. I'm Richie Allen. Without any further ado, it's over to the man himself, David Icke. Hi David.
Hello Richie. The first two programs we've done, I've looked at the structure of how a few can manipulate and dictate the direction of the world. That's program one. And I used the analogy of a spider's web and the spider at the center. And in the second program, I looked at the nature of that spider. What was it? And also at the nature of reality, the illusory nature of reality, the fact that we think we live in a physical, solid world, but we don't. It's an illusion. What it is a holographic world, illusory physicality. And as we go through these programs like this one and future programs, I'm going to be looking at the week's news, but I'm going to be putting it in the context of those first two programs as those shows that showed a certain direction of the world and the way the direction is manipulated and the techniques being used to do that play out in the press and in the media and in the public eye.
They're on YouTube, by the way. They're on YouTube if you missed them.
Yeah.
Episode 1 and 2.
Yeah, it's important if people want to get kind of the gist of what I'm saying on programs like this and future ones that they've really seen those first. They're on davidicke.com homepage and they're on the People's Voice YouTube channel. Now, how funny that, having talked last week about the holographic nature of reality, of course I'm just a nutter, what do I know? I haven't been to university, so I can't know anything. Yeah. Except if you've got a mind, who needs a university? And this is in the Times this week. Holographic theory of universe puts reality into a new dimension. And what it's about is, of course, most of mainstream science rejects the holographic theory because even though it's got quantum physics saying the world's not solid, it goes on its merry way and just, as we say in this country, cocks a deafen as if it doesn't exist. Quantum physics? Oh yes, it exists, yes, that's right. Now, the world's solid. Let's go along the way that the world's solid. And so from its very foundation, mainstream science is fundamentally flawed in the way it sees reality, and that has massive implications for society, one of which I'll come to in a second. So this story in the Times: hologram theory may be one of science's most outlandish attempts to explain the nature of reality. Nothing outlandish about it at all. However, a leading theoretical physicist claims that he has come closer to providing evidence that the entire universe could be viewed as a projection of a two-dimensional shell. And I've been, saying all these years, this universe is a projection which we decode into apparent physical reality, just as a computer decodes information on a disk or a stick and turns it into what seems to be time and space reality on the screen of the computer. And this is something that is becoming more and more prevalent. Like I say, most of mainstream science, not least because it wants to keep its funding and its prestige, oh no, holographic, no. But there are more and more real scientists who are working in the spirit of discovery rather than singing from the song sheet, who are now looking at the holographic nature of the universe simply because when you go along the road, the official road, that basically the reality is solid, you meet so many dead ends and so many cul-de-sacs and so many mysteries, so-called mysteries, are retained and can't be explained from that perspective because it's a flawed perspective. Once you bring it into the holographic realm, then these mysteries start to disappear. And as I say, once it's a bit like smashing a mirror. It goes out in all directions and affects the whole mirror as the cracks go out from the point of impact. Now, in terms of our society, our sense of reality, the point of impact is this perception of the world being solid. Once you do that, everything else gets flawed, including medicine, or what we call medicine. There's been a lot of stories in the British press this week about here's the headline: National Health Shambles, and it's talking about the absolute chaos and suffering and blunders and treatment of people, or mistreatment of people, in what we call the NHS, the National Health Service. But of course, in America, you've got the shambles of Obamacare, and you see this all around the world. Now, the medical foundation from which it treats people, tries to, thinks it does, the way it meets illness, the way it meets dis-ease, is based, because it's one of those cracks in the mirror coming out from the main impact, the world is solid, it's treating the body as if it's solid when it's a holographic projection. This means that, as I mentioned last week, you've got the energetic field, the information field from which the holographic body is projected. And what's going on here at the level of the energetic field and the auric field and other levels of energetic fields that we call the self, what's going on there dictates the nature of the hologram. So if there's a flaw here, there's a flaw there. And so when you've got a medical perception that the body is solid and all the rest of it, then what happens is that you treat the projection. But what's the projection is coming from, what it's a projection of, remains the same, because you're not going there. And we have all this technology now that can show, visualize, measure the electromagnetic fields of the body, and yet mainstream science and mainstream medicine still will not accept the existence of those fields. Thus, they can only do one thing, and this is what mainstream medicine is rightly accused of all over the world by people in the alternative fields. They only treat the symptom, they don't treat the cause. So if you reject, because your song sheet science is so flawed in its perception, if you reject the existence of the field from which the body is a holographic projection, and you're only treating the projection, all you can ever do is treat the symptom and not the cause, because you're not even accepting the point where the cause exists, actually does exist. And so when you introduce drugs, and there's a few stories this week about, see, what you keep getting from the pharmaceutical industry, the treat the hologram as if it's a solid industry, is you find more and more drugs being found for make-believe illnesses more and more. But you also get now this concept of taking drugs as a preventative measure. So now a daily pill cuts breast cancer risk by half, and so it goes on all the time. Instead of even take a drug when something's wrong, take a drug before it goes wrong, because it will stop it going wrong. Well, it won't, for this reason. We see, this is where we need to get our heads around the fact that nothing that we see in what we call the five-sense world is actually solid in its basic form. The basic form of everything in this reality is a vibrating information field of a certain frequency and a certain type. So if it's vibrating very slowly, then that will give the illusion, when we decode it into holographic reality, of being solid. When it's vibrating very quickly, or quicker and quicker, it becomes more ethereal and appears to us, when we decode it into holographic reality, to be less solid. So when you talk about drugs and vaccines, don't start me, we see stuff going in a needle and going in someone's arm. We see someone taking a drug. But that so-called chemical level is only an expression of the hologram. If you take that drug and that vaccine back to its base state, like everything else, it is a vibrating information field. So when you introduce what appears to be, in the holographic realm, a vaccine or a drug, you're actually introducing an energetic field of a certain type. And health comes from the balance within the energetic fields of the body. That's why we call illness dis-ease, disease, disharmony in this field. And this is why all the great alternative healers don't heal the body, they target the field, so the projection becomes healed because this becomes healed. That's the way it works. So a drug or a GM foods or some kind of toxin, if you could see that as an energetic field, it would be incredibly distorted, disharmonious and chaotic. And what you're doing is, at the level where it really matters, you're introducing those disharmonious, chaotic, distorted fields into the field of the body, which then distorts that, which then distorts the holographic projection, and at that point, mainstream doctors, etc., say, you've got a problem with your body, you need a pill or a scalpel. And thus, the health services of the world, whether they're private or whether they are state-funded, people-funded, increasingly less, they always, in the end, run out of money because they're constantly treating an illusion and ignoring the cause. Thus, we get overwhelmed with illness, and we get overwhelmed with all these expressions of energetic disharmony, which you can only correct if you accept and understand the existence of the field that you need to correct. And so it doesn't matter how much money you throw at something in terms of health, you're always going to get the same recurring theme. So in ancient China, where they used acupuncture, and of course you can get acupuncture here now, what acupuncture is doing actually is, through those hair-like needles and other techniques, it's harmonizing the energetic field. That's what it's doing. And so the idea of acupuncture was to keep the energetic field in harmony, therefore you don't get the dis-ease, not to come out with a fire brigade once the dis-ease happens. And if you don't take that, that route of trying to keep the energetic fields in harmony, thus in health, then you're always going to be chasing more illness than there is the ability to respond to that illness. But that's just one example. I mean, we're talking here this week of multiple vaccinations and their effect on children. Dangerous vaccines found to cause symptoms of shaken baby syndrome. On and on it goes. I mean, you know, if you are constantly through the early years of a child's existence, when the immune system for a start is still developing, and you give them that tidal wave of toxin we call vaccines, what I would see at this level, tidal wave of disharmony, what's it going to do to the child's immune system, which is still developing, and what's it going to do to the child's energetic, thus dis-ease health, as we would call it, ongoing? It's going to devastate it, and that is unfortunately the idea. Talking of reality, I mentioned in one of the earlier programs that the idea was to hold people's attention in the five senses. Can I see it, touch it, taste it, hear it, etc.? Oh, it must exist then. At the expense of having a connection and an influence from other levels of yourself, not some bloke in a spaceship, other levels of your infinite awareness. The idea is to hold you in these five senses, this tiny frequency band I talked about in the earlier shows, called visible light, so that is your total focus. That's where you're getting all your information from, all your inspiration from, or what passes for it, not from the greater self. They're now taking this because there is undoubtedly a great awakening going on. The people's voice would not have existed virtually not many years, in fact, not very long before it did exist, because people weren't ready for it. They'd have said, oh, I don't need all that. But there is an awakening going on, and people are opening their minds to things that they would have rejected before. Thus, the people's voice has great support. But what the system wants to do, because people are beginning to look at the world itself in a different way, is they want to up the ante. They want to get you even more connected to the five senses. And this is where transhumanism comes from. And transhumanism, this transhumanist movement, is about connecting the human self, the so-called natural physical body, with technology. And the idea is to use that technology to then not just influence, but totally control the perceptions of the brain, the perceptions of the lower mind. And so, wait for this in the news this week. Google wants microphones in your ceiling and microchips in your head. Google engineering director Scott Huffman says that within 5 years, people will have microphones attached to their ceilings and microchips embedded in their brains in order to perform quicker internet searches. I mean, they're not quick enough now, are they? Because that's rubbish. That's rubbish. It's about getting access to the brain, therefore access to what drives human perception. It's about turning people into externally manipulatable, directable robots. And that's what transhumanism is about. Holding people and pulling people into the five senses through technology, so people don't think outside the box, because they're not aware that there is a box, or never mind anything outside of it. In an interview with the London Independent, Huffman said that Google was working towards a concept based around microphones hanging from the ceiling that would respond to verbal queries. Like a great personal assistant, it will interrupt you and say, "You've got to leave now. It will bring you information that you want," said Huffman, adding 5 years from now, Google will answer you in the same way a person would answer. That's the idea. Turning us into an increasingly less human, more technological, robotic species. He says that he's suggesting people could ask Google to screen football highlights on their television via microphones, arrange travel plans. Google believes it can ultimately fulfill people's data needs by sending results directly to microchips implanted into the user's brain, a concept that Huffman welcomes. At the same time, before we take a break, more transhumanism and robotic control of society. This crime-predicting robot aims to patrol our streets by 2015. California-based Nightscope has designed a 5-foot-tall, 300-pound automaton called K5 to combat crime and provide for public safety. Oh, yes, public safety. Make them frightened, then take their freedoms away to save them from what they've been manipulated to be frightened of. And so we're going to have robots actually looking and using technological means, they say, to predict pre-crime and whether someone's going to do that and whether someone's going to do that. And what it all is a total scam to get technological access to the body, not least through a microchip, and then externally control behavior. And all this stuff with smartphones and Google Glass, they're bringing technology and they're getting it closer and closer to connecting it to the body. And it's all part of the process of the totalitarian tiptoe to take us into this robotic, no free thought society.
Now, David, we'll be back in a couple of minutes. Just before we do go, though, as he mentioned earlier on, if you've missed Dot Connecting before this, go to davidicke.com, find The People's Voice on YouTube, and the previous episodes are on there. We'll be back for more after this. This is Dot Connecting with David Icke. You're very welcome back. David, we were talking transhumanism before the break.
Yeah, we'll switch tacks now, but everything is connected, hence the name of this program. I was talking in the earlier Dot Connecting shows and in my books for the last 20 odd years about the fact that the agenda is for what I call Hunger Games society, where you have a less than 1% fantastically wealthy elite. And then the rest, including people today that feel that they're pretty comfortable or even well off, if they're not part of the less than 1%, they are designed to be in a mega poor, very much symbolized in the Hunger Games movies, the first one that I saw. And the status quo that few controlling the many is designed to be held in place by a strata between the two of a vicious psychopathic police state. We're talking not in Britain alone or America alone. This is planned to be a worldwide global Orwellian nightmare, fascist, communist dictatorship. And if you're going to be the few and you're going to control the many, then you have to centralize decision making. You want, and this is what the agenda wants, a world government dictating to the whole world, every part of the world, a world army to impose the will of the world government. And all these can be seen to be moving into place. A world central bank dictating all global finance, a world currency, which is just one global electronic currency, for which there are massive implications for freedom. Because if you go into a store or a gas station and you hand over electronic money today, a credit card, and the computer says won't have it, you can still at least, although cash is going out of circulation so fast, you can still pay cash. You still have a way of buying something. But this is the idea, when the cash is gone and only the electronic currency is left, and it's designed not to be, going back to transhumanism, not to be your credit card eventually, but to be a microchip. And this is where all this do banking, cashless banking with your smartphone and all that stuff. This is all the totalitarian tiptoe pushing the world in that particular direction. And so if you have no cash, then when that computer says no to your electronic currency, your microchip or your credit card, you have no way of purchasing except barter. It's a control system. That's what it's all about. And they also want a microchip population as part of this whole structure as well. And so I almost smile. It's so pathetic when I see absolute key people in different parts of this system pushing us in this direction, who start to come out using different excuses to try to sell to people this very, very structure. And so this week, we've had a few elements of that story in relation to finance, because the way that the control system is most impacting upon people in terms of creating that structure is to take finance away from the many and give it to the few. I mean, is that happening or what? Every day. And so here's a story this week. Every worker taxed a week's wages each year just to pay interest on the British national debt. And this will be the same around the world. It means that the UK government owes a total of £1.2 trillion, is paying interest expected to cost £72.5 billion by 2017. We're nearing 2014 now. Huge sums servicing the debt, and it's been worked out by this story in the British Daily Mail that it's going to be a week's wages that everyone is needing to pay just to service the debt every year. Now here's the question. Why do governments, who are supposed to be the government and making decisions over a country, why are they borrowing money from the banking system and paying interest on it, i.e. we are paying interest on it up to the tune of what, 70 odd billion pounds by 2017, when they could issue their own currency interest-free? The reason is, of course, is that the same networks, as I explained in the first Dot Connecting show, the same networks that are controlling governments, therefore the passage of legislation, are controlling the banking system. So laws are passed and decisions are made here in the political system to suit the banking system. And thus, we have £72 billion worth of interest on debt, not debt, merely because the government will not issue its own currency interest-free and instead borrows it from the banking system. And connected to that is a headline here. It comes from wakeupfromyourslumber.com. A very good title, because that's what we need to do, and many are. A new bankster scam, negative interest. Zero interest rates, near zero interest rates, are no longer good enough for the banking system. What did I say? Mega poor, and the money all sucked into the hands of the less than 1%. This is how they're doing it, through this. And so the guy who's pressing for that this week and pressing for a cashless society is one Larry Summers. Larry Summers has been on my radar for a long time. He was a Treasury Secretary under Bill Clinton, and so was a guy called Robert E. Rubin, and they worked together along with another guy called Timothy Geithner in the Clinton administration, and they worked closely with a guy called Alan Greenspan, who was the head of the Federal Reserve, which is supposedly be the Central Bank of America, but actually it's a private banking cartel, provable fact. And what they did through the Clinton years, and Greenspan started it when he became head of the Fed during the Reagan-Bush years, and it was continued during Father Bush, then the Clinton years, and it was continued during the early years of Boy Bush. They dismantled the checks and balances of the financial system, therefore leaving unfettered greed to run riot. And that's what happened, and the consequences were obviously going to happen, and they did in 2007, 2008, when we had this massive crash of the economy. And that was a massive problem in search of a solution. And the solution was we have to bail out all these banks that's caused the problem by using money that the people of the countries are going to be responsible for paying back. So there was a massive transfer of wealth, and it continues from the people, the Hunger Games mega poor, as is designed to be, to this less than 1%. And it's interesting, you know, I mentioned in the first Dot Connecting show that the world's controlled by a network of different groups. Some very close to the spider are very, very exclusive secret societies. Then there's more secret societies. And then you come to a cusp where the hidden starts coming out into the scene in governments and corporations and organizations like that. And one of these groups that connected to the spider that I've been exposing for years is Zionism. There's so much nonsense talked about Zionism. First of all, it's been brilliantly manipulated to be the perception in many people's minds of being a race of people, the Jewish people. No, what about the Christian Zionists in America? Zionism is, in its public expression, a political system with a political agenda. But at its core, it is a secret society. And it's a secret society controlled, indeed created, by the House of Rothschild. And these, what I call Rothschild Zionist agents, are placed in positions of power to control events. So how amazing is it that the population, the Jewish population of the United States, is 2% or slightly less? The number of Rothschild Zionists among them will be incredibly less than that in knowledge of what they're doing. And so we have Larry Summers, Rothschild Zionist, Robert E. Rubin, Rothschild Zionist, Alan Greenspan, Rothschild Zionist. When Greenspan stood down in 2006 because of the crash he knew was coming because he was creating it and he didn't want to take the flak for it, he was replaced as head of the Federal Reserve by Ben Bernanke, Rothschild Zionist. Now he's moving out, and replacing him is Janet Yellen, Rothschild Zionist, who was vice chairman of the Fed to Bernanke. And now, this very week, it's been reported in the New York Times that Janet Yellen, Rothschild Zionist's vice chairman, is going to be Stanley Fischer, who is the former head of the Central Bank of Israel, Rothschild Zionist. And this is how it works. And what happens is there is this racism kind of label that is thrown at people that highlight this to keep them quiet. Well, I'm sorry, I ain't having it. And if what I just said was about Chinese people in that concentration controlling the American economy, it happens around other countries too. If they were Hispanics, if they were African Americans, people would go, hold on, what's going on? But because of that, I'm not supposed to say anything because you're anti-Semitic. Well, you know, I'm sorry, the truth is the truth. You know, I'm looking for the truth, not a statue, personally. And again, this is an interesting point. You see the Roman Catholic Church and you see Judaism or what I would call Rothschild Zionism, and you see them as apart from each other, even in conflict, even in opposition. But actually, because of the spider and the web, they're all answering to the same spider, even though here they seem to be unconnected. And so you have this story this week at blacklistednews.com. Vatican bank scandal, JP Morgan, HSBC cease doing business with the Vatican. Well, how bad can it be if those two, JP Morgan and HSBC, cease to do business with anybody? I mean, it must be catastrophic. And it's just the latest installment of the Vatican bank farce, where every now and again the corruption of the bank comes to light. Here on June the 20th, a Vatican cleric, a former Secret Service agent and a financial broker were arrested by the Italian police and charged with fraud and corruption. And the three were suspected of smuggling $24 million by private plane across the border from Switzerland. And when I read the story, one of the funniest things about it was that the Vatican Bank's official name is the Institute of Religious Works. Well, God does work in mysterious ways, so they tell me. And this is another, dot connecting example, because the Roman Church, indeed the Christian Church, which came out of the Roman Church in all its various forms and expressions, actually is the Church of Babylon relocated. And the same networks that were behind the Church of Babylon are behind the Vatican. And therefore, to many people, most people, it was shocking what happened in the late 70s, early 80s, when the last great Vatican banking scandal was revealed. That this church, this religion could act like that. Well, if you know it's the Church of Babylon and you know the story, they're just acting in it's par for the course what they're doing. Of course they are. And what happened, for people who didn't come across that scandal of the late 70s, early 80s, is that a guy called Licio Gelli, who was a Mussolini fascist and who was a close friend of Juan Perón, the fascist in Argentina, and a close friend of Father George Bush and Ronald Reagan, he kind of likes the same kind of person, clearly. He was arrested, and what they found was a series of documents that showed that the P2 Freemasonry Lodge in Rome, which he headed, Licio Gelli, was broken up into sections, and each section had a head, and the head of each section only knew who was in their section, and anyone in their sections only knew people they met in their interaction with that section of people. The only people that knew all the people in P2 and all their connections was Licio Gelli and his little cabal at the top. And what they found when they looked through these documents is within P2 and these different segments of it were top people in the media, in the military, in intelligence, in government, in finance, and all the rest of it. And they were meeting each other, people in these different sections, they were meeting each other, not even knowing both were members of P2. And this is how the structure of the spider's web works. It's fiercely compartmentalized. And just on the Church of Babylon example or point, in Babylon, ancient Babylon, they had a trinity, and it was Nimrod, the father god. It was Ninus or Tammuz, the virgin-born son of Nimrod, in fact, an expression of Nimrod, as I'll come to. And the third point of the Babylonian Trinity was called Queen Semiramis, also known as Ishtar. And what they said was that when Nimrod died, he went to become the son, he became the son known as Baal, the sun god. And that he impregnated Queen Semiramis in the Babylonian myths with rays of the sun, and she gave a virgin birth to Tammuz, Ninus, the son. And they said, therefore, that father and son were one, right? I wonder where I've heard that before. So when this lot moved in on Rome and created the Christian church out of the Roman church, they simply took the Babylonian Trinity and they turned Nimrod into the father god, Ninus Tammuz into Jesus, the virgin-born son. And the other point of the Trinity, the Christian Trinity, is the Holy Ghost, which they symbolize as a dove. And in Babylon, Queen Semiramis was symbolized as a dove. And what they did is they took all the attributes given to Queen Semiramis in Babylon, Virgin Mother, Queen of Heaven, and all these things, and they gave them to this character they created called Mother Mary. And so the agenda of the Church of Babylon became the agenda of the Church of Rome. And I talked in the last program about the way pedophilia is so prevalent because entities that are possessing possessing the energy fields of humans, especially at certain bloodlines, they feed or they draw off the energy of children before puberty. That's the energy they want more than any. So you would expect to have massive pedophilia in any organization connected as another version of the Church of Babylon. And what do we have in the Roman Church? Massive pedophilia, because that is not a church. It is an expression of a network of manipulation that's come through history. And if you want to control people, again, control their minds, squeeze their perception of the world and self, then get them to believe that everything they need to know about self and the world is between the covers of a single book, be it the Bible, the Quran, the Talmud, whatever. And then get them to believe that some bloke in a frock, whatever form they take, is the arbiter and the middleman between you and some God. Because what that little package does is make religion the greatest form of collective mind control ever invented. And that's what the Roman Church is there for, and that's what all religions are there for, to control the minds of the populace.
Good stuff, mate. That's the end of part 2 of Dot Connecting with David Icke. I know you'll be back for part 3 in just a minute. Welcome back to the final part of Dot Connecting with David Icke. Don't forget to go to davidicke.com and find The People's Voice on YouTube, where you'll be able to watch previous episodes. David, over to you.
Yeah, what I thought I'd do in this last part is just go quickly through a number of stories to show how this Hunger Games society is unfolding. I mentioned in previous shows about, like I say, the Hunger Games society in terms of finance and the mega poor. But I also talked about the fact that the plan is under something called Agenda 21. Google Agenda 21, by the way. Or if you don't Google it, use another search engine. But Agenda 21. They want to move people off the land and put them into really concentrated mega cities of high-rise buildings with very, very small living accommodation. And they call them human settlement zones. How Orwellian can you get? And they also want to create a situation where the state controls all food production and food distribution, so that if you want to eat, then you have to do what the state tells you and go where the state tells you. And therefore, you can look through the papers every week and you can see individual stories. But when you come from that perspective, you're not seeing individual stories anymore, you're seeing a pattern. So let's start. I'm going to go for a few around the world. Financial Times this week, Osborne targets fresh cuts in welfare, or to welfare. George Osborne is the Chancellor of the Exchequer in Britain, in charge of the finances. God help us. Yesterday vowed to find billions of pounds of welfare savings in an overhaul of Britain's public finances as coalition tensions over how to eradicate the deficit bubble to the surface. All around the world, we are getting this theme bubbling to the surface, which is saying austerity is for the long term. And austerity in Britain, as in America and other parts of the world, has reached the point in places like Greece and Spain and Portugal, etc., where it's really cut into the bone of people's ability to survive and to eat and to how many hungry children are there in the world now? And this guy Osborne, like all around the world, is saying that we've got to that state, but we want to cut more and more and more, and austerity is for the longer term. This is the process of squeezing and squeezing and squeezing people. And increasingly it's the middle and people that were middle classes and people that were considered, you know, well off, who are now feeling the real pinch. I mean, you've done interviews on this in the last week, I know, where this is being highlighted. They're starting to feel the pinch of these austerity measures. And the idea is to keep it going and going and going until you have that mega poor. In America this week, they've agreed a budget deal, but it doesn't include the extending support. They've not done a deal on this yet, extending support for more than 1 million people who are set to lose their unemployment benefit later this month. So they do a deal. Well, yeah, we've got the budget. We can pay this, we can pay that, all the things that we want for our friends and what have you. But, oh, the poor? What do you mean you're going to lose your benefit later this month? We can't do a deal on that. Here is in Britain, families feel the pinch as energy costs rocket. Another story, food prices to rise faster than salaries until 2018. Now, this is all about, if you put the dots together, it's all about squeezing and squeezing and squeezing the population so they become less and less able to survive and look after themselves, and therefore the state starts taking on the role of dictator. If you want to eat, if you want this, if you want that, this is what you've got to do. And this I mentioned about the plan to control the production of food, and I'll come to that in a sec. But here's a headline, and this is not a rare headline. It should be, but it isn't around the world now. Church group targeted by city for feeding homeless. It's happening in Britain. A street ministry in Olympia, Washington, focused on feeding the homeless is currently fighting attempts to have their work criminalized by the city. So now common decency is criminalized. Why? Because they don't want common decency. They want to play us off against each other. They want to stop us helping each other, so they're criminalizing it. Here's another one in The Guardian. Small farmers alarm as Brazil moves to end ban on GM Terminator seeds. Terminator seeds are seeds that can only be used once, will not produce seeds for the next year, which is what farming's supposed to be about, and thus when you've used them once, you have to buy more from the biotech, etc. cartel, not least Monsanto, if you're going to have crops the next year. And of course, once we're in a situation where other crops are destroyed by GM because of cross-contamination, is happening all the time. And what's happening is when a farm is contaminated by GM, that a farmer doesn't want GM, it might want organic. But once it's been contaminated through no fault of its own, Monsanto and their like are taking the farmers to court for growing their crops, GM crops, without paying royalties. So the idea is to take over the whole food production, not least through GM. And we are having a situation more and more where this is happening, not least in America, where GMs absolutely vastly dominates the food production industry, and they want the same for Europe. But Europeans are resisting it more. European people are resisting it more. The EU absolutely wants it when it thinks it can get away with it. So this GM, it not only has tremendous effects on the body, because going back to what I said earlier, genetically modified food, if crops, if you could see that on an energetic level, you'd see an incredibly distorted energetic field, which we are introducing to our energetic field, which is distorting that and then plays out in the hologram as all the effects that we see with GM. This is a story this week of 800 world scientists coming together to agree that GM crops are nothing short of a bio-war on our food. And when you look at what they're doing to our food, what they're doing to our drink, what they're doing to our water supply, what they're doing to our atmosphere, what they're doing electromagnetically, I mean, do they have the best interests of humanity at heart? Or if you connect the dots, is there some kind of war on humanity, mentally, emotionally, and what we call physically? Absolutely there is. And then this is another story. It's all part of this structure I'm talking about. It's about Britain, but the same's happening around the world. Working class MPs, members of parliament, becoming an endangered species. The number of MPs from working class backgrounds fell from 98 to just 25 between 1979 and 2010, according to a report published today. And what it's doing, not only are you seeing the money go to the less than 1%, you're seeing the political power being sucked into that as well. Now, I mentioned about human settlement zones. Now, the idea is to get people off the land and force them into these tiny little units, almost like cupboards, which is, it's in the documents. Don't anyone tell me this is being made up. And here is in The Independent this week, a whole generation won't be able to buy or rent a home. A generation of Britons faces a housing double whammy as a growing number of people cannot afford to buy or rent a home, according to a report published today. The study warns that house prices are set to rocket by 35% by 2020 and that private sector rents are likely to soar by 39% over the same period. Here we see the squeeze again and again, forcing people out onto the streets. And when they go out onto the streets, homeless and hungry, anyone who wants to feed them out of common human decency is facing the criminalization of that. Put the dots together, people, for goodness sake. Having lovingly worked the land on their farm for more than 30 years, this couple, actually on the Isle of Wight, fully enough, has been forced out of their farm. Bureaucrats forced couple off farm they wanted to give to sons so it can be flooded for wildfowl. Now, I'm all for looking after animals, but that's not what this is about. As I mentioned in one of the earlier Dot Connecting shows, the idea is to get people off the land. And there are more and more ways that they're doing it. They're doing it through making small farmers and family farms impossible economically. They're changing the rules and the laws and the regulations so they can't farm as they used to. They're forcing them off the land through environmental regulations that are so fierce and ridiculous that they cannot economically continue. And when they lose their farms because they can't continue, in come the corporations and they're buying up the land. And where do these farmers go? Where do these farming families go when they can't make a living out of the country anymore? They're going into the cities, which is exactly where they're manipulated to go. And this brings me to this, a massively important story, and that is fracking. If fracking gets the green light is a story here. It's being supported by the British government, it's being supported by the American government, governments all around the world. You look at the number of protests against fracking all over the world now. It's come out of nowhere. And when something comes out of nowhere and suddenly everywhere, it's the agenda. Someone's pressed the button on the next stage. What is fracking doing? It's dismantling the stability of the earth, where they frack. It's releasing radon gas, which can be lethal radiation, and it's destroying water supplies by polluting them with hundreds of chemicals that they put with the water to do the fracking, and that polluted water is getting into the groundwater, which is destroying water supplies, drinking water supplies. Once they've done that, once they've destroyed the land, where are people going to go? They can't drink the water anymore. It's not sustainable anymore. They're going to the cities, which is where they want them to go. And it's all being justified by Agenda 21, which is based on global warming is true, human activity is putting the planet in danger, and we must transform human society and deindustrialize human society to save the world. When global warming, climate change caused by humans, climate's been changing ever since the climate existed, is an absolute mega lie and deception. And here's the story this week. Antarctica, record cold and growing ice chills global warming theories. The big news from Antarctica these days is the record low temperature of minus 135.8 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the coldest temperature ever recorded on the planet. What seems to be going unreported, I wonder why, is that on top of the record cold in Antarctica, the southern ice sheet is growing at a pace faster than global warming theories can account for. Sea ice around the Antarctic averaged 17.16 million square kilometers. That's 6.63 million square miles in November. The long-term 1981 to 2010 average for November is just 16.30. And therefore, while the global warming kind of advocates are giving us all these catastrophic scenarios, we're all going to, islands are going to disappear because the ice is melting. The ice is getting thicker and more expansive. And as this writer says, if the contradictory evidences like record cold against rising global temperatures can be cited as equally proving the same hypothesis, can it really be called science? Because as we talked about in one of your shows this week, if the temperatures go up a bit, and overall they've not gone up since 1997, but if they go up a bit, that's global warming. If they go down, that's global warming. If there's increased ice and all the rest of it, that's global warming. That's climate change. So whatever happens, they justify climate change by it, and it's a lie which is being used to transform global society through Agenda 21. Do you know greenhouse gases, CO2? Oh, it's ever so dangerous, CO2. Do you know there'd be no life on Earth without CO2? And you know something? What are the greenhouse gases that take up well up to the high 90% of all greenhouse gases? Water vapor and clouds. Everything else is in above that. 90-odd% of greenhouse gases are made up of water vapor and clouds. And if we want to save the world, we must therefore have a ban on condensation and a ban on clouds. I mean, how ludicrous can you get? And this lie has to be nailed. And more people are realizing from their own daily experience that a lie it is. And this is the extent at which it goes to, Richie. This is on the Activist Post website this week. Santa threatens to cancel Christmas with a creepy global warming video aimed at kids. I've seen it. It's this disheveled, miserable-looking Santa who says this to children. It's from Greenpeace, ought to be ashamed of themselves. The Green Movement has completely bought this global warming lunacy and therefore is supporting changes in society that are designed to enslave us, including them. This is what Santa says. Dear children, regrettably I bring bad tidings. For some time now, melting ice here at the North Pole has made our operations and our day-to-day life intolerable and impossible. And there may be no alternative but to cancel Christmas. And he's got this miserable face, this down, cancel Christmas. I have written personally, says Santa, to President Obama, President Putin, all world leaders. Sadly, my letters have been met with indifference. Needless to say, these individuals are now at the top of my naughty list. Well, that's at the top of my absolute nonsensical list, because that's what it is. And how long have we got left? Because I do want to read something.
I reckon we got about 60 seconds.
60 seconds. I'll use that in the next one. This is a guy called Richard Day, Dr. Richard Day. I'll use it next time. He was a leading executive of Planned Parenthood, which is a Rockefeller operation. The Rockefeller family is majorly part of this web that I talk about. And in 1969, he addressed a meeting of pediatricians in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And for some explicable reason, only he knows why, he said he wanted people to put their pens and paper down, turn off any recording equipment, because he was going to tell them how the world was going to change. And he reeled off all the things, 1969, that were going to happen in the world. And I'll read them next week. And when I do, people will be astonished at how 1969 became 2013.
And it's a red letter day in history anyway, isn't it? A year, I should say, not day.
But it's all a coincidence, nothing to worry about.
Exactly. Well, David will, of course, be back next time on Dot Connecting. Don't miss that. You can catch him, of course, Monday to Friday, doing a paper review with me on The Richie Allen Show. As we mentioned earlier, if you want to catch back episodes of Dot Connecting, the way to do that is to go to davidicke.com. They're also being put on YouTube on the People's Voice YouTube channel. We'll see you next time on Dot Connecting. Bye for now.